Yo, what's up, guys? Oh, I was just waiting for y'all guys to get here. You know, just, uh, just passing the time. Man, I found this one little game, yo. You ever play Sudoku, however you say it, yo, the number game? Yo, Norbert, what's up? So like, I've only ever had three games on my phone. I ain't gonna lie. I've had chess, Fruit Ninja, and Sudoku. And normally I only play Sudoku, so I don't know how I seen the advertisement for this, but there's this game is called Block Doku or something. So instead of putting numbers in, it's like a Sudoku board, and they give you shapes. You can't flip them around, you can't reverse them or anything. So each round you get three shapes, and you have to fit them into the boxes. And if you get just like Sudoku, if you get the whole box or if you get a column or a row filled up, it'll disappear and you get points for it. It's kind of like, it's a weird kind of Tetris almost. But bro, I'm so addicted to this shit right now. 37-year version. You know what I can do with the Sudoku board? Yo, imagine this, right? So imagine you got the Sudoku board and you gotta fill in the blocks. Yo, this shit get let's see. Okay, I can get this block right here if I put that square up. Wham. Alright. Fit him right there. Fuck. I'm gonna put this piece. Oh, shit. Come on, man. Wham. Yo, Malik, just waiting on people to come into the stream. I don't know. What you want to talk about? I ain't hit no current events or nothing today. Lately, I just been talking about the same thing, like some esoteric shit. Ooh, combo. See this right here? I think that's a bad move. Like anytime you get a piece, and if you place it, and you have like just one, you have one blank square, like that square in the corner. If I place this here and it stays, then I'm gonna have that one blank square all the way to the edge. That shit ain't good because you hardly ever get like a single block. They keep giving you these configurations. Every once in a while, they'll give you just like one little teeny square that you can fit somewhere, but you don't get them shits all the time. So my strategy is not to box off one box by itself like that. Always try to keep a space where you can fucking fit some kind of piece in there. Put that bitch there. Ooh, that's a line. See, that's a little teeny square right there. I'm gonna put that bitch in that corner too. Put him there. Put that there. You some bitch. Alright, I'm about to turn this shit off. I ain't gonna lie, yo. Like I said, bro, I'm addicted to this damn little game. Damn, they got me stuck with the long piece. Oh, I can put him right there. Alright, as soon as I lose, because I fucked up too bad. What the fuck? Wow. Why didn't I just put that square there? Damn, I just saw that spot. Son of a bitch. Alright, I'm about to lose in a second, yo. Yeah, I swear I'm about to lose. Let's see. Oh. And they jam me up. Son of a bitch. Only got 500 points. Anyway. That was a waste of time. So somebody just sent me a link. Reparations hearings were a sham, says Dr. Claude Anderson. So this is Dr. Boyce Watkins and Dr. Claude Anderson. I don't know what this is. Somebody literally just sent me a link to this YouTube video.
What's going on, everybody? Let me give you guys time to come into the conversation. This is an important conversation, so I'm going to be very patient in terms of allowing you all to join us. Today, we're actually talking about something that I personally think it affects the future of Black wealth. It's a reflection of the history of our people in terms of what we've gone through. It is a discussion about reparations. It's a conversation that every family needs to have out of respect for our ancestors, and it's something that I believe the experts and the scholars need to be involved with. I think that you need the smartest people at the table when you talk about reparations, because it is so important. And one of the smartest people I know is the individual that I have the honor of joining me today for Powernomics Thursday. Dr. Claude Anderson is here. As you all know, he's the author of the books Black Labor, White Wealth, Powernomics, Dirty Little Secrets 1 and 2, The Black History Reader. He's dedicated his life to reparations. He's dedicated his life to this conversation. He has been completely devoted and committed to these issues for a very long time. And so I wanted to make sure I lent my platform to ensure that you guys heard from the people that I believe you should hear from. So without further ado, I'd like to ask my friend Dr. Claude Anderson. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm in good condition, just a little bit upset about what happened yesterday with the Congressional Black Caucus, but that's typical. It's been going on for centuries, but I can live with it.
Interesting. Okay, so the Congressional Black Caucus, in case you guys don't know, in case you've been buried under a rock, a lot of you will know that the Congressional Black Caucus has called for hearings on reparations, and a lot of people feel that this has happened because there's been a lot of pressure coming from various sources, various individuals throughout the community to talk about reparations, to talk about money that's owed to us for hundreds of years of stolen wealth, stolen labor, stolen rights, stolen property, stolen everything. I mean, just so many things stolen from us, and they're talking about it now. Now, Dr. Anderson, let's just start from the beginning, I guess. Now, you're an expert on reparations. You have been talking on this topic for a really long time. You have been addressing this issue through your books. If anybody ever wants to really understand the story of why reparations are necessary, your book Black Labor, White Wealth addresses this in a way that I to this day I have not seen anyone address it quite as well. When you first heard, let's start from when you first heard about the hearings that were happening in D.C. How did you feel when you even heard that they were even beginning to have this conversation? Were you hopeful at all, or were you kind of concerned that it wouldn't be what it was meant to be?
Well, no, I wasn't the least bit surprised. I figured it would be exactly what it came out to be. Is that throughout history, let me tell you something, throughout history, white folks have always had two processes they link together. One is called shampooing blacks. They sham, then they lead the poo in. And they have ways of attracting blacks and getting black folks' attention, which I call rope-a-dope. Goes all the way back, as I might have said to you last time, that goes all the way back to the shores of Africa. And see, now I noticed that they see you wearing a red shirt. If you go back to Africa, when slavery started back in the 1500s, learned very quickly that the best way to get black folks' attention and to be able to capture them and capture their emotion and their intellect is to use bright colors. So then most of the African slave traders would go to Africa. You know what they would do? They'd get on the shores of the African coastline and get them 2 or 3 of the most visible chiefs they got in that tribe, or their minions. And then they would go out on the beach and they would wave red cloth, yellow, green cloth. And black folk in Africa were always attracted to bright colors. And so they would take your color, they come running down to the shoreline to get some, because they would say, we're giving out free cloth. And that's what the chiefs would tell them. And as soon as they got there, guess what happened? They would get caught, captured, tied up, and branded, and put on a ship in the world for enslavement. And so that's what's been happening to black folk throughout history. We got leaders now who allow themselves to be put in a position, not leaders, but visible blacks, put in a position wherein they're going to give a pretense, they're going to do something to help black folk, about how black folk are going to benefit. That started on the shores of Africa. It went all the way through history. It went through, and even during the 1800s, when blacks got interested in religion, and the evangelical movement moved through the United States in about 1795 and 1796. But by 1818, black folk got interested in Christianity, and they wanted to be involved in the practicing of Christianity. And the whites said, "We'll let you get it. We'll let you join. But what we're going to do, we're going to select the ministers. And you come to church. We have to pick the ministers." And we pick ministers who are controllable and put them over you. And we'll sit in the background and watch and make sure he says nothing that violates the catechism of slavery, which means he's to teach you 2 or 3 things. 1, that you're to be humble and obedient. 2, that you're to be loyal and faithful to your master. And 3, that you look for pie in the sky after death. So white set that as a pattern. Always use visible blacks in positions to be able to lead that black folk into something they're not getting anything out of, period. That went followed all the way through the 1900s. They would pick black athletes, black entertainers, black movie stars, black comedians to get up in front of black folk, whether it's Jesse Owens or Joe Louis. Those are good people, but they didn't know anything, but they didn't have the experience. They were taken out of their context and put in a situation where white folk would use them to try to placate most of the blacks in the country. So Jesse Owens and Joe Louis were all over the country trying to promoting how black folks should be humble and obedient and be cooperative and everything. That's what they became spokespersons for segregation in the United States all through the 30s and 40s, all through the 1950s. And that was a pattern. In recent times, they still use the same thing. They pick black athletes or black entertainers or black comedians and put them up in front of black folks and say, these are the authority. These people know everything about black conditions. That's how Jim Brown and Steve Harvey and Kanye West got caught doing the same thing. They picked visible people. Now, and see, if you couldn't get away with that in any other society. If any other society saw it, you would never see Jews allow somebody to come by and say, we want to get some spokesperson for Jews in America, in the world. And you're going to go pick some athletes and entertainers and comedians and put them up in front of them. People who have no knowledge, no training, no experience in dealing with religious matters or the conflicts in Judaism, and put them up and say, this is your spokesperson. They will never get away with that. American Indians wouldn't tolerate that. You don't understand the conditions, the culture of the Indians. They ain't let you get away with that. And neither would Arabs, Asians, any other group. Neither would white people let the entertainers and athletes be their spokesperson. Only in the black race can white folks, going all the way back to Africa, have always selectively picked models and put them up in front of black folk on very serious issues. And they do it for the purpose. Here's the purpose now. I give you a long speech. Here's the purpose. The purpose is to do nothing, to maintain the status quo by confusing black folk. You can put black folk in some minor control position by letting black with visible recognition and name recognition be the spokesperson for them, even though those people have no background and training and experience in race matters. And even though they're good people, I'm sure that Jim Brown and Steve Harvey and Kanye West and even these recent people are good people, but it's unfair for you to keep sticking them up in front of in a national forum and let them speak on issues with the seriousness of black people. And what they offer is, because they don't have the training and the education, the background and experience in these matters, you know what they do, Watkins? They give a bunch of anecdotal justifications for reparations. Talk about it, make it an emotional issue, how my mother was mistreated, how my great-great-granddaddy was lynched, all this stuff. They don't have the factual base to justify reparation. That allows white folks to come down on them hard and come up with all kind of stupid, arrogant questions and responses to reparations. They may put it down, in fact, and so black folk would never be able to achieve anything. So to answer your question, doing that, this last situation I heard, it took black folk backwards again. Same as they did when they came out of slavery. They should have had a chance to focus on the real issues and reparation. What the real issue is, two things: knowing what racism is and being able to define it. Secondly, is to stay focused on the purpose of slavery. What was the purpose of slavery? I'll guarantee you right now, and I'll bet you right now, $100 take you to dinner when I catch up with you. I'll bet you they did not discuss the purpose of slavery. And that's what the whole focus should have been on. What was the purpose of slavery? The purpose of slavery was to systematically maldistribute 100% of all this nation's land. Did they discuss it? They didn't discuss it. They didn't discuss that. So what are you talking about? You're going to talk about we're going to talk about how everybody be treated, about minorities. And we should all be concerned about real democracy. All that's BS. Now you tell me, is that what they discussed on the program? Strictly, what's the purpose of slavery? When are you going to correct it? Because otherwise, black folk cannot survive in this country very much longer. Only 2% of anything of value, while whites own 98%. Can't be done. Black folks.
Want to know what's really happening in your neighborhood?
All the way from Russia. What up?
The Judiciary Subcommittee on the Constitution, Civil Rights, and Civil Liberties will come to order. Thank the officers for their help in getting the door shut and getting folks in. Thank you so much. Without objection, the chair will authorize to declare a recess of the subcommittee at any time. I welcome everyone to today's hearing on H.R. 40 and the path to restorative justice. I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. Today is Juneteenth, a day that commemorates the announcement of the abolition of slavery in Texas and more generally throughout the former Confederacy on June 19, 1865. The news of the Emancipation Proclamation did not reach Texas for 2 years. And so it was not until 1865 that all enslaved people knew they were free, despite President Lincoln's emancipation announcement. Slavery was a crime against humanity, one whose impact we as a society continue to grapple with today. This year also marks the 400th anniversary of the first African slaves being brought to America. Slavery was our nation's original sin. Our Constitution protected it, embodying it in various compromises that gave disproportionate power to slave states. For example, the 3/5 clause counted a slave as 3/5 of a person per population count. Of course, they weren't considered persons, but property. But that in turn gave disproportionate representation to slave states in the House of Representatives. The Constitution also created the Electoral College, a system of electing the President of the United States that gave slave states another avenue to exercise disproportionate influence over national affairs. It is only fitting, then, that we should hold a hearing today on H.R. 40, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals for African Americans Act. My colleague, Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, who is in another hearing right now, she's here with us, thank you. A member of the subcommittee, is the current lead sponsor of this legislation, and I'm proud to be a co-sponsor with her, along with the full committee chair, Jerry Nadler, also a longtime co-sponsor of this bill. But the greatest credit for H.R. 40 belongs to two individuals. First and foremost, John Conyers. Mr. Conyers is a former colleague, former chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, a great American and a great leader. Mentors. Reasons that I have introduced this resolution with him since 2007. He introduced it first 30 years ago. Introduced it every Congress thereafter until his retirement. The second individual most responsible for H.R. 40 is sadly John Wilkes Booth. His assassination of President Abraham Lincoln led to Andrew Johnson becoming president. And President Johnson effectively rescinded the promise made by General William T. Sherman to former slaves that they would each be guaranteed 40 acres of land to make a living as a free person. Promise sometimes colloquially referred to as 40 acres and a mule. President Lincoln would have carried that out and had plans to do it. But because of that dastardly day and deed of April 12 of 1865, it didn't occur. It was April 14 maybe. Anyway, H.R. 40 we created.
Yeah, and then after that, after they rescinded the land dividend, you had the Freedmen's Bureau was supposed to kind of help out with the transition of that, and then the government just pulled money from that program and is like, fuck the Freedmen's Bureau also. And it's like, I don't know. I think they said, well, Texas got the news in fucking 1865, but there was some state, Alabama or Mississippi, one of them really didn't ratify slavery until like 2011 or some dumbass shit, yo. Like, really recently. They just, whoever was supposed to sign it just never signed it for all these fucking years, and it's like, yeah, we don't got slaves, but we're not signing the document, so technically slavery isn't really ratified in our state. So it's a weird ass history, and people think it's ancient, but it's not. It's like really fucking recent still. I've heard people like, oh, fuck you, bitch. What the fuck? Alright, yeah. I've heard people say like, oh, slavery was 200 years. I've actually heard somebody say slavery was 300 years ago. It was like, that was long ago, like 300 years ago. I'm like, no. And some people like, yo, slavery was like 200 years ago. No. Slavery was 154 years ago. Not even 200 years ago yet. And then really, if you want to get more technical, it's really like 54 years. Because the Voting Right Act was signed in 1965. So that's when, under the rule of law, a black man or woman, an African American in the States had all of the equal rights then. You know what I'm saying? Like that Voting Rights Act supposedly made us fully equal with everyone else. Finally, like this is the last thing, and now you guys can vote for, government officials. And that was only 54 years ago. But I don't know. When it comes to reparations, it's such a complicated matter due to what they said should have been granted, to who they said it should have been granted, and how much was going to be granted. And with inflation rates and currency rates over the years, like and adjusting for that, and then figuring out who is actually eligible to receive some of the funds from that. It's like it would be a lengthy process, but motherfucker, y'all had a long time. Could have been did this. But like Dr. Clark Anderson was saying, is like shit ain't really gonna change.
The study of the history of slavery in America, the role of the federal and state governments in supporting slavery and racial discrimination.
There are no reparations. How can money make it better? Entrepreneurship, ownership, land ownership, property ownership, actually having some type of assets is what makes it better. And a lot of the reasons that the black community has been on the lower tier since the inception of this country is because it's designed that way. It's designed for us not to have assets and property and businesses in our own schools. And throughout slavery was the period where, the Europeans were taking the best land for themselves. We want all the good land. We ran the Indians out, killed all the Indians, and now they own and control all of the best land. And so if there was some type of reparations incentive that actually held up and made sense and put into some type of, trust fund where if you can prove your lineage that your ancestors and actually toiled and enslaved for someone else and that you're eligible to these funds, then you have to come up with a viable business plan or produce some type of deed saying you're trying to buy your first home for you and your family or something like that, not just like, oh, my family was slaves, y'all give me some money, like, what you gonna do with it? Show me what you're gonna do with the money. And that's how it'll make it better, you know what I'm saying? And then, you know, most of these, like Dr. Claude Anderson was saying too, all these entrepreneurs who come up, they're like entertainers and stuff, but they're business minded because they had to come from the streets. Now, if you got a business minded young adult who can see his goal and is trying to figure out a way to accomplish his goals, and now he can be financed by the street life because there are no other alternatives or options for him, or he can have access to this this trust that would be made for people like him who family deserves a hand up, you know. Work and save your money. This is true. This is true. But situations and circumstances in different communities have different impacts on job opportunities, career opportunities. Uh, we've already done studies on dropout rates because of poorly funded schools in certain districts, in certain neighborhoods. We've done research studies on double-blind application acceptance for, you know, higher paying jobs where two applications have exactly the same credentials, but one name sounds African American and the other one sounds European. And every time without fail, the African American application is pushed to the side with the exact same credentials. So yeah, you can work hard and save your money if you have those opportunities to earn a so-called decent living. Where most people who earn decent livings don't have to stress and struggle coming up throughout their childhood because, you know, their family have had a house that was passed down from their grandparents to their parents, and when their parents die, they probably can have that house too. Oh, this is my dad's house. I grew up here, and so you never had to buy your first house, and for the simple fact that your family has owned property for such a long time, your dad was able to open up his own little small engines mechanic shop or whatever, and things like that is what allows certain communities to have more advantage than others just from initially owning land and property, and that takes a lot of stress off of other aspects of life where you don't have to worry about shit like that. But for the African American community, like, our standard of living has always been so stressful, motherfuckers just trying to stay alive. And shit has changed, and I know tons of my brothers and sisters who got good ass fucking jobs. Got fucking PhDs and degrees and high level security clearances and everything. But that's because we gotta slowly break this cycle that's been going on for so long. Like, for so long. And it's still there, and it's still a fucking struggle for people to understand, like, the real influences and instigations of what keeps our society structured the way it is. Because it is by design. Because nobody wants to be poor. Nobody wants to be uneducated. Nobody wants to be labeled as a criminal. But our society is still structured in such a way where it breeds these negative aspects of the human personality.
Discrimination against the descendants of slaves and the lingering consequences of slavery and Jim Crow on African Americans. The commission will also make recommendations as to appropriate ways to educate the American public about its findings and appropriate remedies in light of its findings. An honest reckoning with the federal government's role in protecting the institution of slavery has been a leading priority of my congressional career. In 2007, my freshman year, less than 2 months into that term, introduced H.Res. 194, an apology by the House of Representatives for its role in perpetuating both slavery and its noxious offspring, Jim Crow. The House ultimately passed this resolution by voice vote, and I once again thank Chairman Conyers for getting it a vote and getting it to the American people. As I noted in my resolution then, it was not just slavery itself that was wrong, but also, quote, the visceral racism against persons of African descent upon which, unquote, American slavery depended, a racism that went on to become entrenched in the nation's social fabric, an evil that we must continue to confront today. Can we get that door closed? Thank you, sir. My resolution emphasizes while slavery was our nation's original sin, the underlying sin of anti-black racism did not end with the Civil War and the 13th Amendment, and Congress's inaction and acquiescence in the face of such racism was a big reason why. Racism became only further entrenched after slavery's end, as reflected in societal attitudes and in Jim Crow laws, a system of state racial segregation laws that created separate and unequal societies for whites and African Americans, one that was enforced through both official means and through lynchings, violence, intimidation, and disenfranchisement. And not until 100 years after the end of slavery did Congress, under pressure from Dr. Martin Luther King, John Lewis, and other great civil rights leaders in the civil rights movement, finally carry out its duty to end Jim Crow by passing the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that still exists to some extent, and other core civil rights statutes, better fulfilling the Constitution's guarantees of equal protection for all. Today, our nation continues to struggle with the legacy of
what did he mean by
racism
that
and
just now? I should have stopped as soon as he said it, but I'm still trying to analyze, like, what the fuck? What do you mean by that?
Through both official means and through lynchings, violence, intimidation, and disenfranchisement. And not until 100 years after the end of slavery did Congress, under pressure from Dr. Martin Luther King, John Lewis, and other great civil rights leaders in the civil rights movement, finally carry out its duty to end Jim Crow by passing the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that still exists to some extent, and other
that still exists to some extent. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 that still exists to some extent. To some extent. What does that mean, guys? What is he? He's dropping little hints there. I ain't really sure, but it's making me feel uncomfortable. Because he's thinking the same thing I'm thinking. Keep telling people, man, it's just an act. It's the Voting Rights Act. It's not a law. And they will take it away someday.
Of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that still exists to some extent, and other core civil rights statutes, better fulfilling the Constitution's guarantees of equal protection for all. Today, our nation continues to struggle with the legacy of the anti-black racism that undergirded slavery and Jim Crow. We see this in statistics that paint a bleak picture. According to the Census Bureau, 21.2% of African Americans lived in poverty in 2017, compared to 8.7% of non-Hispanic whites who live in poverty. That's over 2 times as many. The Census Bureau also reported in 2015 that the net worth of African American households was only about $13,000, which was less than 10% of the nearly $140,000 net worth of non-Hispanic white households. Limited access to wealth, building resources, and opportunities have led to this stark disparity. For instance, African Americans continue to face discrimination in the workplace. They have limited access to educational opportunities, according to the National Education Association.
Now, I just said all this. Now, this was recent. This was on June 20th, I think. The congressional hearing for reparations. And all the shit I just spit right before they do start spitting the same shit. Like, we know the reasons why black people are still fucked up. And they're obvious reasons. And they're severely detrimental to our communities. And yeah, some people can make it out, but some people can't. But once again, it's made that way. The system is deliberately set up that way for generations, where you're constantly living off someone else, paying someone else rent to live on their property instead of building equity in your own property, because you don't have the resources to buy property, because they own everything. They own all the land and everything, and they make it so expensive now that you can't ever get it. And then if you do get a little piece of it, now you gotta pay taxes. And if you ever stop paying your taxes, you're gonna come take your damn shit. Oh, you thought this was yours? No. Ha ha ha. Silly. This will never be yours. Never.
Graduation rate for African Americans was 67% compared to the nationwide average of 81%. African Americans also continue to face racial segregation in housing and discrimination in the availability of quality health care service and most other major facets of life. Enacting H.R. 40 would be an important step in finding effective long-term solutions to these problems, ones that can trace their origins to our nation's shameful history of slavery and anti-black racism. As the distinguished Professor Charles Ogletree of Harvard Law School once noted, the concept of reparations does not necessarily mean payments to individuals, but rather a focus on the poorest of the poor, including efforts, quote, to address comprehensively the problems of those who have not substantially benefited from integration or affirmative action, unquote. I hope our hearing today can lead to fruitful conversations with the aim of achieving that goal. I thank our witnesses for being here today and look forward to their testimony. It is now my pleasure to recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Johnson, for his opening statement. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start today by saying I maintain the utmost respect for my colleagues on the other side, and I know their beliefs on this issue are sincerely held. I want to thank all our witnesses for being here today, for your good faith testimony and your scholarship. We've all read through it in detail and made many notes. I'll use my brief time here to just focus on an overview of what H.R. 40 is and why we're here. What we're going to discuss here today centers upon a regrettable and shameful portion of American history. Slavery in America and elsewhere was a horrific injustice, the perpetuation of which was antithetically opposed to the founding ideals expressed in our Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, including its Bill of Rights. Of course, the evil institution of slavery was legally abolished over 150 years ago on December 6, 1865, via ratification of the 13th Amendment, following the end of the tragic Civil War. The bill today, H.R. 40, would, quote, establish a commission to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans. There are serious questions about this from all sides of the political spectrum, and they're honest and sincere questions that we want to address. But putting aside the injustice of monetary reparations from current taxpayers for the sins of a small subset of Americans from many generations ago, let me finish. The fair distribution of reparations would be nearly impossible once one considers the complexity of the American struggle to abolish slavery. Just consider this, okay? There are tens of millions of today's non-African Americans who are descended from people who arrived in the country, of course, after slavery ended. and therefore they can't be held responsible for its legacy. More tens of millions are descended from people in both the North and South who didn't own slaves, or who were descended from white people who fought in the Civil War on the Union side. Indeed, only a small percentage of the total American population were slave owners. For the aforementioned reasons and many others, such an approach has been widely unpopular, at least in our recent history. In the 1970s, civil rights organizations openly rejected the idea of reparations, which the NAACP's assistant director himself called, quote, an illogical, diversionary, and paltry way out for guilt-ridden whites, unquote. Bayard Rustin, who organized the 1963 March on Washington and was one of Martin Luther King Jr.'s closest advisors, described the concept as, quote, a ridiculous idea, unquote. Barack Obama opposed reparations when he ran for president in 2008, and Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders did as well 8 years later. In addition to all this, here in the Judiciary Committee, we have an obligation to acknowledge that any monetary reparations that might be recommended by the commission created by H.R. 40 would almost certainly be unconstitutional on their face. The reason for that, listen, wait a minute. The reason for that is a legal question. See, the legal question is, the federal government can't constitutionally provide compensation today to a specific racial group because other members of that group, maybe several generations ago, were discriminated against and treated inhumanely. According to the U.S. Supreme Court, they would refer to that as an unconstitutional racial preference. See, the holding of the 1995 case, Richmond v. G.A. Cross and Company, is that racial set-asides and other entitlements are only constitutionally permissible to remedy the present effects of the government's own widespread and recent discrimination. And the federal government is not allowed to provide race-based remedies that are, quote, ageless in their reach into the past and timeless in their ability to affect the future, unquote. Now listen, I get it. I've read the scholarship. I know that some proponents of reparations itself would be cathartic for our nation. But we have to ask if discussions can result in justice today. They certainly probably won't provide consensus. Instead, many people of good conscience believe they'll distract from the many persistent causes of current racial disparities. They certainly exist. The despicable racism of America's past is part of that, as Mr. Coates, for example, has documented in a very compelling way. But so are other social and cultural dynamics, which are themselves often negatively influenced by well-intended government policies. Let us be clear today. Racism violates the most fundamental principles of our great nation, and it breaks the heart of our just and loving God. The central idea of America, what has been called as our foundational creed, is that we boldly declare the self-evident truths that all men are created equal, and that we are thus endowed by our Creator with the same inalienable rights. Because each of us is made in the image of God, every single person has an estimable dignity and value, and our value is not related in any way to the color of our skin, what neighborhood we live in, or intelligence.
And others for their both tireless and tired efforts. This historic agreement would have been impossible in this short a period of time were it not for the trust and confidence which has existed over 200 years between the United States and its oldest ally, France. I applaud the French government and the French people. His commitment to a just outcome of these claims reflect he flew to Washington on virtually no notice. Today is a historic occasion. It further evidences France's courageous decision to face the consequences of its Vichy past during World War II. I want to commend the French delegation, ably led by Ambassador Jacques Andriani, former French ambassador to the United States and special envoy for the French government. The French delegation arrived here from Paris late.
There's a gap as wide as the Grand Canyon when it comes to the issue of how's that money going to be divided up, and that's what we need to do. We have a session now, and basically we're going to go in and tell them what our thoughts are And if we come to a resolution, then tomorrow there'll be an announcement. If we don't, tomorrow there'll be a walkout. It's not going to be a show. They've shown a willingness to be totally inflexible, to potentially kill the deal, and to do a disservice to the survivor victims that they're supposed to care about. Mine is 9751. Right.
Aber sonst ist die ganze Gruppe praktisch im Konsens, bis auf die Osteuropäer. Der Dissens war so hart, dass ich nicht glaube, dass jetzt innerhalb von 2 Stunden die zum Umkehren ihrer Positionen kommen.
Musician is the best way to learn, practice, and master a musical instrument. Just play along with any guitar.
Our value is inherent because it is given to us by our Creator. Many of my colleagues in this committee may not be aware that in addition to our 4 children still at home, my wife Kelly and I actually have a much older son who happens to be African American. We took custody of Michael and made him part of our family 22 years ago when we were just newlyweds, and Michael was just 14 and out on the streets, nowhere to go, and on a very dangerous path. Michael's grown now, he has his own young family, he turns 36 years old next week, and he's a loving dad to 4 precious children of his own. God's been good to us, and he's a success story. I mention that today for one reason.
He's a success story. I
personally know the challenge that he has faced early in his life. I have walked with him through discrimination that he's had to endure over the years and the hurdles he's sometimes faced. I know all this, but I was with him. I asked Michael this weekend what he thinks about the idea of reparations. In a very thoughtful way, he explained his opposition, and it reminded me of something that Harvard history professor Stephen Thurnston has previously testified in this very committee, and he said this quote as I'm wrapping up. Finally, I would urge the members of this subcommittee and the House of Representatives as a whole to ponder carefully the message that will be conveyed by the passage of this bill, H.R. 40. When you are behind in a foot race, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. said in 1963, the only way to get ahead is to run faster than the man in front of you. So when your white roommate says he's tired and goes to sleep, you stay up and burn the midnight oil. Dr. King's words reflect an important tradition of self-reliance, I'm still quoting, that has had eloquent advocates in the African American community. Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, and many others. All of them were saying in their different ways that African Americans were not powerless to better their lives until America owned up to its historical sins and offered them a generous financial settlement. The point is as important today as ever. That's what he wrote to this committee the last time, or one of the last times this was debated. Those great leaders encourage people to take control of and responsibility for their own lives because that gives every human being a greater sense of meaning, purpose, and satisfaction. And I know everybody in this room probably agrees with that idea, that principle. The premise of H.R. 40 and similar legislation, however well-intended they may be, risks communicating the opposite message. Would it propagate a worldview that says external forces from a century and a half ago are directing the fate of black Americans today? I mean, it's an honest question some people ask. I think people who wholeheartedly agree that our nation is still in the process of healing from its reprehensible sins of the past can ask that question. There's no doubt that prejudice exists in our society just as it has in every society since the fall of man in the garden. It exists in many communities and between many different races and types of people, sadly, and it is not reserved to just one race or class or ethnicity against another. All of it is despicable, and every single instance of it is un-American. The question, the honest question we have today, and that's what we're here to discuss, is what do we do about it? All of us are here to listen to the thoughtful discussion today. I hope we'll do it respectfully and with civility. We approach it in good faith. I promise you every member of Congress does. And I look forward to hearing from all of our witnesses. Thank you again. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And I want to apologize. We're not supposed to, in the audience, respond or speak out or applaud or cheer, and I'm probably wrong for having encouraged and allowed what I think was a proper reverence for Mr. Conyers, but if you not allow my error to be compounded, try to keep cool. And I'd now like to recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Nadler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this important hearing. This year, we mark the 400th anniversary of the first enslaved Africans arriving at the colony of Jamestown, Virginia. Today's hearing on H.R. 40 and the path to restorative justice gives us the opportunity to reflect on the shameful legacy of slavery and Jim Crow in this country and to examine how we can best move forward as a nation. For nearly 3 decades, the former chairman of the Judiciary Committee, John Conyers of Michigan, introduced H.R. 40, which would establish a commission to study reparations proposals for African Americans. Our colleague, the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, has taken up sponsorship of this legislation, and I am pleased to be a co-sponsor, as I was a co-sponsor for many years when it was sponsored by Mr. Conyers. H.R. 40 is intended to begin a national conversation about how to confront the brutal mistreatment of African Americans during chattel slavery, Jim Crow segregation, and the enduring structural racism that remains endemic to our society today. Even long after slavery was abolished, segregation and subjugation of African Americans was a defining part of this nation's policies that shaped its values and its institutions. Today, we live with racial disparities in access to education, healthcare, housing, insurance, employment, and other social goods that are directly attributable to the damaging legacy of slavery and government-sponsored racial discrimination in the century following slavery's end. It is important to recognize that H.R. 40 makes no conclusion about how to properly atone for and to make recompense for the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow and their lingering consequences. Instead, it sets forth a process by which a diverse group of experts and stakeholders can study the complex issues involved and make recommendations to us. Most serious reparations models that have been proposed to date have focused on restorative community-based programs of employment, healthcare, housing, and education initiatives, righting wrongs that cannot be fixed with checks alone. This moment of national reckoning comes at a time when our nation must find constructive ways to confront a rising tide of racial and ethnic division. In April, this committee held a hearing on hate crimes and the rise of white nationalism in order to begin framing a federal response. Hate crimes, white supremacy, the legacy of slavery, the legacy of Jim Crow, all hold back our country's longstanding efforts to carry out what the preamble to our Constitution says it is designed to do, to form a more perfect union. Reparations in the context of H.R. 40 are ultimately about respect and reconciliation, and the hope that one day all Americans can walk together toward a more just future. I hope that the commission established by H.R. 40 can help us better comprehend our own history and bring us closer to racial understanding and advancement and justice. Today's hearing gives the subcommittee an important opportunity to hear from witnesses directly involved in shaping the discourse on healing our society and creating a path to restorative justice. I am pleased that we have such a distinguished panel of witnesses whose testimony will assist us greatly in understanding the scope of our inquiry. The discussion of reparations is a journey in which the road traveled may be almost as important as the exact destination. I am pleased that the subcommittee is beginning this process today, and I look forward to hearing from our witnesses. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Nadler. I'd like to ask for unanimous consent that Ms. Representative Karen Bass be allowed to sit on the dais. She's a member of the committee, but not the subcommittee. Without objection. Thank you. Welcome, Ms. Bass. And Mr. Green was just here from Houston. I think he's coming back. And now I'd like to recognize the gentlelady from Texas for an opening statement, Ms. Sheila Jackson Lee.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and thank you to Chairman Nadler for identity of H.R. 4 as a legitimate legislative action that should receive the full hearing of this committee, should in fact have a markup, go to the floor of the House, go to the United States Senate, and be signed by the President of the United States of America. This is an action of legislative commitment, and this is not a symbolic action. though I am gratified that we are having this hearing on Juneteenth. And for those of us who understand Juneteenth, 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, there were those Africans who did not have freedom until 1865. So let me begin and indicate to my friends who have expressed a variety of assessments of H.R. 40 that America is a place that welcomes the diversity of thought. We even welcome the diversity of thought among the multicolored chocolate people that are African Americans, descendants of African slaves. Let me be very clear. It is only this group, even though they attempted to enslave Native Americans, it is only this group that can singularly claim to have been slaves versus the institution and leadership of the United States government. And so H.R. 40 is in fact, the response of the United States of America long overdue. Slavery is the original sin. Slavery has never received an apology. This commission would be comprised of members selected by the President of the United States, the Speaker of the House, the leader, and of course, those who've been entrenched in this process. I spoke to John Conyers yesterday. I'm honored to have been given the opportunity to lead this bill. You said to move on and to lead on, and for us to take this forward. Thank you, Congressman John Conyers, for all that you have done. So let me share with you just a sense of what we face. Let me first of all say the number of Africans who died in the Middle Passage, over 2 million. Slaves who died during slavery, first, second, and third generation, over 2.5 million. The transatlantic slave trade was the largest movement of people in history. Between 10 and 15 million Africans were forcibly transported across the Atlantic between 1500 and 1900. At least 2 million Africans, 10 to 15%, died in the infamous Middle Passage, as I said, and another 15 to 30% died during the march to or confinement along the coast. Altogether, for every 100 slaves who reached the New World, another 40 died in Africa or during the Middle Passage. Who has a history like that? Reparations of this commission.
Detroit Red Wings. The hell is that? Hockey? This dude won a hockey team.
Should be welcomed by all Americans. For we are not asking one American to give one payment. What we're saying is it's the only way that slavery ended. The governmental action of the 13th Amendment, governmental action. Reconstruction failed after 12 years because it was imploded by governmental people. Reconstruction, a reign of terror that had never been seen. Hanging fruit, the lynching, the oppression of voting, the tearing away of land. Amazing concept of the continuing de jure and de facto impact of slavery today. 1 million African Americans are incarcerated. It's a continuing impact. The black employment rate is 6.6%. in spite of what has been said currently, more than double the national unemployment rate. 31% of black children live in poverty compared to 11% of white children. The national average is 18%, which suggests the percentage of black children living in poverty is more than 150%, even in spite of the glorious overcoming of the talent of our community, the scrapping together of making sure our children received education, putting together something out of nothing, still have been impacted. And only 57% of black students have access to full range of math and science classes today. Black children were vaccinated at rates lower than white children. Education mobility has been limited. Black children represent 19% of the nation's preschool population, yet 47% of those receiving more than one out-of-school suspension. Black students are 2.3 times as likely to receive a referral to law enforcement. And we know the criminal justice system. So I conclude by these words. In America are the descendants of Africans kidnapped and transported to the United States with the explicit complicity of the U.S. government and every arm of the United States lawmaking and law enforcement infrastructure. The dehumanizing and atrocities of slavery were not isolated occurrences, but mandated by federal laws that were codified and enshrined in the Constitution. The role of the federal government in supporting the institution of slavery and subsequent discrimination directed against blacks is an injustice that must be formally acknowledged and addressed. I am not here in anger or anguish. I am not in any way seeking to encourage hostilities. There are diverse opinions in this room. I understand it, appreciate it, respect it, admire it, and love it. Product of my history. Clearly, how that has walked this path, no, did not pick cotton. I will say that those who picked cotton created the very basic wealth of this nation. For cotton was king. There was no other product. And so I ask my fellow colleagues, this is simply a constructive discussion that will lead to the practical responses. And if I might, Mr. Chairman, put this article in the record, Times, dated June 17th, downtown boom, Kansas City, Missouri, and just a few blocks away, devastation in the black community. Mostly in every area. I ask unanimous consent, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
2 cities. I also ask unanimous consent to put a statement of support from John Legend.
Without objection.
2 cities, Mr. Chairman. And so let me just conclude by saying I hope that we come in peace. I know that we'll hear from Senator Booker. I thank him. And I thank a number of others who have done this, including the heads of state, scholars, and activists in the Caribbean, are playing a leading role in the global reparation movement. Many have been inspired by our work. I'm delighted to see that Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, Vice Chancellor of the University of West Indies and Chairman of CARICON Reparations Commission, has traveled all the way from Jamaica to be here. Thank you. I am particularly glad that we're coming together as brothers and sisters and passing out accolades. I want to certainly acknowledge NCOBRA for its steadfast leadership on this issue over the years and playing an instrumental role in garnering sponsors of H.R. 40. We're also delighted that several members of the National African American Reparations Commission are present. I want to thank them for working closely with the Dean, Congressman John Conyers, in reforming H.R. 40 into a bill to study reparations. I'm delighted to have reintroduced it with its modification and carrying it forward to its next level. Thank you, Dr. Ron Daniels. We thank you for your leadership. Look forward to working with you in the National African American Reparations Commission as we educate the nation on the importance of enacting H.R. 40. And I'd like to thank Reverend Al Sharpton, National Action Network's convention, because he asked 15 presidential candidates what their position was, and we now have raised this to a national level. I just simply ask, and why not now? If not all of us, then who? God bless us as we pursue the final justice for those who lived in slavery for 250 years in the United States of America. Please support H.R. 40 to its passage and signature by the President of the United States. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your generosity and kindness. I yield back.
Ms. Lee, I'd also like to ask that HRS 194 which was an apology for slavery that the House passed in the 110th Congress, a resolution apologizing for the enslavement and racial segregation of African Americans be introduced. For the record, without objection, should be done. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
And I would, yes, ma'am.
Just want to, you did acknowledge Ms. Bass. I just want to indicate that Ms. Bass is the chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus, and we're delighted that she's here in many roles, so we thank her for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for yielding.
HRES 194 was intended to start this dialogue and have a national dialogue. Unfortunately, the Senate did pass an apology, but Mr. Brownback included a sentence that said it would have no effect upon reparations. Despite Mr. Hillary Shelton and Wade Henderson's insistence that it should still pass together and we can have a dialogue, we passed different resolutions, but the Senate did pass an apology as well in the, I think it was the 111th Congress. And that was because of the good work of Mr. Senator Tom Harkin. I would like to introduce to the record the testimony from William Darity Jr., a professor of public policy, and African American Studies and Economics at Duke University. Without objection, so done. And now I would like to come to the first panel, and we'd like to welcome to the first panel Senator Cory Booker. Senator Booker, your written statement will be entered into the record. Ask you to summarize your statement to 5 minutes. Senator Booker represents the state of New Jersey in the United States Senate. October 16, 2013, he won a special election, and on November 4, 2014, he was reelected to a full 6-year term. He sits on the Senate Judiciary, Foreign Relations, Small Business and Entrepreneurship, and the Environment and the Public Works Committees. He is the sponsor of S 1083, the Senate companion to H.R. 40. He received his JD from Yale Law School and his undergraduate degree from Stanford University, where they also play football. He was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford University, earning an honors degree in history. Senator Booker, welcome, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Nadler, Chairman Cohen, Ranking Member Collins, and Ranking Member Johnson. I'm glad that my written testimony will be put into the record. I just want to say that I'm sitting before you on many days that I come down to Washington brokenhearted and very angry. I live in a black and brown inner city community below the poverty line. I've lived and worked in communities like this all my adult life. And yesterday, hundreds of yards from where I live, there were 7 black men shot. This is an everyday occurrence in America. I have the privilege of having leaders in my community who over the decades have given me strength. One of them was a woman who lived on the 5th floor of the projects, our tenant president in some buildings in which I lived, whose son was murdered as well in our community. And she taught me that hope is the active conviction that despair won't have the last word. Like this, when I come back to Washington, D.C., 7 people shot in my community. I wonder if other senators had people shot like that in their neighborhood, whether that wouldn't be a lead national story. But I see the lives of low-income folks, the lives of black and brown folks. When people are shot and killed, the world seems to keep going on. And so I wonder about having the last word. What happens when the last word is no words, when it's silence? A sense of anger where we are in the United States of America, where we have not had direct conversations about a lot of the root causes of the inequities, pain and the hurt manifested in economic disparities, manifested in health disparities, manifested in a criminal justice system that is indeed a form of new Jim Crow. And so we as a nation have not yet truly acknowledged and grappled with racism and white supremacy that has tainted this country's founding and continues to persist in those deep racial disparities and inequalities today. This is a very important hearing. It is historic. It is urgent. I look at communities like mine, and you could literally see how communities were designed to be segregated, designed based upon enforcing institutional racism and inequities. We know that racialized violence and terrorism has persisted from Reconstruction well into the 1950s, as my friend Brian Stevenson's National Memorial for Peace and Justice shows. We've seen bombings of churches. We've seen massacres at places as recently as the Emmanuel AME Church just 4 years ago, the stain of slavery was not just inked in bloodshed, but in the overt state-sponsored policies that fueled white supremacy and racism and have disadvantaged African Americans economically for generations. Many of the bedrock policies, in fact, that ushered Americans into the middle class were designed to exclude African Americans from the GI Bill to Social Security, intentionally designed to exclude blacks, as was school segregation, redlining, neighborhoods like the one in which I live, which were by design walled off and disinvested in. And while these policies of the past, their damage and their reality has endured across generations and have created and led to so much of the racial wealth gaps in our country. Right now, we see cities like Boston where the average white family has somewhere around $240,000 in wealth, and the average black family has about $8 in wealth. Health outcomes also vary widely by race. National black women are nearly 4 times as likely to die from pregnancy complications as white women, and in so many other areas. Our criminal justice system as well. No difference between blacks and whites for using drugs or selling drugs, but African Americans are about 4 times more likely to be arrested. These injustices do not just cause injustice for African Americans. It enforces a deep injustice in our nation as a whole. It is a cancer on the soul of our country and hurts the whole body politic, making us all less wealthy, making us all less just, making us all fall far short from being who we say we are when we swear an oath that this will be a nation of liberty and justice for all. I believe this is an urgent moment, and this bill, which I am now leading on the Senate side, is the beginning of an important process, not just to examine and study this history that has not been addressed, the silence that persists, but also to find practical ideas to address the enduring injustices in our nation. The characterizations of such an effort that I hear from others is wrong and undermines our collective purpose and common ground. This idea that it's just about writing a check from one American to another falls far short of the importance of this conversation and what I believe we will truly talk about. I say that I am brokenhearted and angry right now. Decades of living in a community where you see how deeply unfair this nation is still to so many people who struggle, who work hard, who do everything right but still find themselves disproportionately with lead in their water, Superfunds in their neighborhood, schools that don't serve their genius, healthcare disparities that still affect their body and their well-being. As a nation must address these persistent inequalities or we will never fully achieve the strength and the possibility. Hope is the active conviction that despair will not have the last word. I believe right now, today, we have a historic opportunity to break the silence, to speak to the ugly past, and talk constructively about how we will move this nation forward. As the old African saying says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. It's about time we find the common ground and the common purpose to deal with the ugly past and make sure that generations ahead do not have to continue to mark disparities, but can truly talk about a nation where, as our ancestors spoke from the good book, where justice rolls down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much, Senator Booker. I appreciate your testimony, very heartfelt and well received. I also want to just reiterate that Congressman Al Green was here, and he's a great champion. Now I'd like to call upon our second panel and thank Senator Booker for his sponsorship and his statement and wonderful words. Thank you, sir.
No
Second
applause
panel, if
for
they
you.
come forward, I guess we need chairs. Here we go. The chair crowd is here. Good. Mr. Shelton, with those cameras, were they here for you? Okay, enough with the pictures. If Hope Hicks hearing, well, that's neither here nor there. We welcome our witnesses and thank them for participating in today's hearing. Your written statement will be entered into the record in its entirety, and I ask you to summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. There's a lighting system. Green means you're on. Blue means yellow means you've got a minute left, and red, you're over. Cut. Finished. Before proceeding, I remind each witness that your written and oral statements made to the subcommittee in connection with this hearing are subject to penalties of perjury pursuant to 18 U.S.C. 1001, which may result in the imposition of a fine or imprisonment of up to 5 years. Our first witness is Ta-Nehisi Coates. Madison, I'm sorry, Chris Hayes didn't teach me well when we first met. Mr. Coates is an author and distinguished writer in residence at New York University Carter Journalism Institute, a position he's held since 2017. He's held a variety of academic positions since 2010. Additionally, from 2008 to 2018, he was a national correspondent for The Atlantic, where he wrote an extensive piece in June 2014 on the case for reparations. I believe he also addressed Rhodes College on that subject sometime in Memphis, Tennessee. He's the author of 3 books, numerous articles, and blog posts. Mr. Coates, thank you for being here, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Yesterday, when asked about reparations, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell offered a familiar reply. America should not be held liable for something that happened 150 years ago, since none of us currently alive are responsible. This rebuttal proffers a strange theory of governance, that American accounts are somehow bound by the lifetime of its generations. To this century, the United States was still paying out pensions to the heirs of Civil War soldiers. We honor treaties that date back some 200 years, despite no one being alive who signed those treaties. We would love to be taxed for the things we are solely and individually responsible for. But we are American citizens, and thus bound to a collective enterprise that extends beyond our individual and personal reach. It would seem ridiculous to dispute invocations of the founders or the greatest generation on the basis of a lack of membership in either group. We recognize our lineage as a generational trust, as inheritance. And the real dilemma posed by reparations is just that, a dilemma of inheritance. It is impossible to imagine America without the inheritance of slavery. Historian Ed Baptist has written enslavement, quote, shaped every crucial aspect of the economy and politics of America, so that by 1836, more than 600 million, or almost half of the economic activity in the United States, derived directly or indirectly from the cotton produced by the million-odd slaves. By the time the enslaved were emancipated, they comprised the largest single asset in America. $3 billion in 1860 dollars, more than all the other assets in the country combined. The method of cultivating this asset was neither gentle cajoling nor persuasion, but torture, rape, and child trafficking. Enslavement reigned for 250 years on these shores. Ended, this country could have extended its hallowed principles, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to all regardless of color. America had other principles in mind. A century after the Civil War, black people were subjected to a relentless campaign of terror, a campaign that extended well into the lifetime of Majority Leader McConnell. It's tempting to divorce this modern campaign of terror, of plunder, from enslavement, of white supremacy, respects no such borders. And the god of bondage was lustful and begat many heirs, coup d'etats and convict leasing, vagrancy laws and debt peonage, redlining and racist GI bills, poll taxes and state-sponsored terrorism. That Mr. McConnell was not alive for Appomattox, but he was alive for the electrocution of George Stinney, alive for the blinding of Isaac Woodward, alive to witness kleptocracy in his native Alabama and a regime premised on electoral theft. Majority Leader McConnell cited civil rights legislation yesterday, as well he should, because he was alive to witness the harassment, jailing, and betrayal of those responsible for that legislation by a government sworn to protect them. He was alive for the redlining of Chicago and the looting of black homeowners of some $4 billion of that plunder are very much alive today. I am sure they'd love a word. Oh, is that while emancipation dead-bolted the door against the bandits of America, Jim Crow wedged the windows wide open. And that is the thing about Senator McConnell's something. It was 150 years ago, and it was right now. The typical black family in this country has 1/10 the wealth of the typical white family. Black women die in childbirth at 4 times the rate of white women. And there is, of course, the shame of this land of the free, boasting the largest prison population on the planet, of which the descendants of the enslaved make up the largest share. The matter of reparations is one of making amends and direct redress, but it is also a question of citizenship. 40, this body has a chance to both make good on its 2009 apology for enslavement and reject fair weather patriotism, to say that a nation is both its credits and its debits. If Jefferson matters, so does Sally Hemings. That if D-Day matters, so does Black Wall Street. That if Valley Forge matters, so does Fort Pillow. The question really is not whether we will be tied to the somethings of our past, but whether we are courageous enough to be tied to the whole of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coates. Next witness is Mr. Danny Glover. Actor, producer, and an activist for various causes. He's currently Goodwill Ambassador for UNICEF, Chairman of the Board of Trans-Africa Forum, an African-American lobbying organization for Africa and the Caribbean, and a friend of Harry Belafonte. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you.
You start the clock.
Thank you, Mr. Coates. It's not often that you hear the words of a young man and they enliven your emotional memory, your historic memory, as he just did at this moment. Thank you so much. I am deeply honored to be here today, offering my testimony at this historic meeting about the reckoning of a crime against humanity that is foundational to the development of democracy and material well-being in this country. A national reparations policy is a moral, democratic, and economic imperative. I sit here as the great-grandson of a former slave, Mary Brown, who was freed by the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863. I had the fortune of meeting her as a small child. I also sit here as the grandson of Reese May Huntley and Rufus Mack Huntley. My maternal grandparents were both born before Plessy versus Ferguson, the Supreme Court decision in 1896. and for a significant portion of their lives, they worked as sharecroppers and tenant farmers in rural Georgia until they were able to save enough money to purchase a small farm. They were subsistence farmers. Despite much progress over the centuries, this hearing is yet another important step in the long and heroic struggle of African Americans to secure reparations for the damages inflicted by enslavement and post-emancipation and racial exclusionary policies. Many of the organizations who are present today at this hearing are amongst the historical contributors to the present national discourse, congressional deliberations, and Democratic Party presidential campaign policy discussions about reparations. We are also indebted to the work of Congressman John Conyers for shepherding this legislation. The adoption of H.R. 40 can be a signature legislative achievement, especially within the context of the United Nations International Decade of People of African Descent. We should also note that the Common Market Nations and the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, Reparations Commission, chaired by Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, who is here with us today, has exercised a leadership role from which we as a nation can benefit. Our sustained, direct, effective policy actions in full collaboration with African Americans and progressive citizens, allies, is the ultimate proof of the sincerity of our national commitment to repair the damages of the legally and often religiously sanctioned inhumanity of slavery, segregation, and current structural racism that limit full democratic participation and material advancement of African Americans and of our country's progress as a beacon of justice and equality. So I call on all of the elected public officials in Congress to demonstrate your commitment in action today and stand forth with Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee and co-sign H.R. 40. In closing, with the insightful and still relevant words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968.
And so you put somebody up there now who's shucking and jiving, getting a shampoo, and talking about anecdotal incidences of slavery, about how they were followed around in Target store and by a guard, a security guard, a tractor follower. That has nothing to do with racism. That's not nothing to do with a damn thing about slavery.
Well, everybody, I'm talking to Dr. Claude Anderson. He's the author of the books Powernomics, Black Labor, White Wealth, The Black History Reader, and Dirty Little Secrets 1 and 2. His website is powernomics.com. I encourage everybody here who believes in understanding the nature of racism, understanding the nature of reparations, understanding the nature of slavery, understanding the nature of America. I encourage you to go to powernomics.com, have your children read Dr. Anderson's books. In our household, we start off, we discuss Powernomics principles on a regular basis. Black Labor, White Wealth, I keep that book next to me. I got the Black History Reader somewhere around. These are the only books I keep, right next to my desk like that. And the reason I do it is because, I'll tell you, Dr. Anderson, I didn't begin to really understand the depth and the nature of this issue until I was exposed to your work, because it's easy to, get caught up in that rhetoric, the rhetoric of, black people can't go into the store without being followed around, or a white lady, clutched her purse when she saw a black man, or white people treat us badly, things like that. But when you went into Black Labor, White Wealth, what I really liked about it, and I want everybody to, if you know somebody in the Congressional Black Caucus or somebody in D.C. who's a part of these hearings, tell them that if you haven't read a book like this, you don't understand what's really going on, because the thing is that you're trying to make a case. You're making a case. You know, Ta-Nehisi Coates, to his credit, you know, he wrote an article called The Case for Reparations, and he did okay, you know, for where he is. He's not a scholar, though. He's not a scholar. He's not an economist. He's not a historian. But he tried, right? And the thing is, if you're trying to make a case, you need facts, you need data, you need information. And so one thing I can show you all is the reason this book is marked up, you know, and I just have to sing your praises on this, Dr. Anderson, but this book is marked up because you have references and documentation, you have charts and graphs, you show examples of timelines of specific laws and structure that was put in place to do one thing, and that, at least one of many things actually, which was to extract resources from Black people. You're showing, it's like a CSI episode where you see where the robber committed the robbery. Like you're showing, like, okay, when they robbed the bank, this is the gun they used. This is the bag they used to carry the money in. This is the tunnel they built to get the money out of the bank. And that's a very different kind of case than the one that's typically being made. When you're showing that documentation, they call it having receipts, Dr. Anderson, just in case you know, that's the term people use, having receipts. Dr. Anderson is, you know, he's got receipts in these books, you know, and so I think that as Black people, we're going to have a real conversation about reparations. Two things have to happen. And I'd like to get your take on this, Dr. Anderson. Number one, we need our smartest people at the table. You know, we love Danny Glover's a great guy, but he's not he's not a reparations expert. Ta-Nehisi Coates is a great guy, but he's not the best expert that we have. These entertainers and politicians, they might be trying to do the right thing, but these are not the brightest and strongest Black people that we have that can make the best case. So, Dr. Anderson, can you speak to why you feel that people who really understand the reparations issue are not invited to participate, you know, in hearings like this? What do you think is going on there?
Well, I think two things. Primarily right now is that the Congressional Black Caucus, ever since they joined since Black joined the Democratic Party, as a matter of fact, back in the late 1950s, Black folk have placed more importance on playing politics and solving the problem, resolving the problems of Black folks who live in America. And they've been pretty well manipulated and controlled either by the Democrats or by the Republicans. That's your biggest problem. And so what the Democratic Black Caucus is doing yesterday, whenever what took place, was again placing more importance on doing something for the Democratic Party rather than doing something for Black folk. You got some sharp, competent Blacks in this country. If they'd have picked Black folk who had the background, the training, the experience, and the knowledge, and the insight, and a plan and a structure for solutions, it'd have been a much more profitable opportunity for Black folk in people like Joe the Plumber or Senator McConnell can not ask these stupid questions, and Black folks sit there and can't even answer the damn question. The typical question would say, well, you know, Dr. Anderson, my parents came here 70 years ago from Europe, and we never owned any slaves. Why should we be paying reparations to Black folk? And not one in that Black panel can even answer that question. They don't have the experience to answer it. And they say, what they should have said if they had been experienced. Well, hold on a second. The whole issue in reparation haven't got a darn thing to do with necessarily who all owned the slaves. Owning the slave was not the important point. I said because of your absence of experience and knowledge, training in reparations, that's how you get sucked in. The question is, who benefited? It's who benefits. That's who owes the reparation debt. Because you see, this country owes Black folk an indebtedness. They owe Black folk, but and people who got the benefits, that's who's supposed to pay off on it. Right now, if I built a house and had contractors building it, and for whatever reason, if I died off and you moved into it, say I'm in this house now, there is a mortgage on that house. The subcontractors, to the bricklayers, to the plumbers, you owe that debt. That debt is owed, whether you did it or not. All white people came to this country for some very specific things, contrary to the popular myths they put out just to distract Black folk through these kind of discussions. Is that, well, we came here for freedom, we came here for better opportunities. We came here for right to vote. Came here for the job. No, you came here to get wealth and get unearned benefits. Not let's say between 1830s and 1936, for example, that 100-year period, you had 36 million immigrants came to America in that period of time. Dr. Why? Because they weren't coming here looking for no right to vote. They didn't cross the seas for over a month sailing on a ship to get here. They could vote. They came here looking for unearned benefits. The unearned benefits for being able to get free land and free black labor. That was what they came here for. They've already been paid. Now they have an indebtedness for what they got. The whole white society owes black folk. Because the key thing for black folks' survival in this country, in a capitalist society, is what you own and control. This is what I'm telling you. It's what you own and control. And that comes from what? It comes from wealth. Now, I got black folk in front of that meeting. Well, what is wealth? They don't most of them only fully understand what wealth is. Wealth is the fruits of labor. Have wealth without having labor. Can't be done. It's impossible. I mean, if I can have gold in a hole in the ground, but if somebody doesn't go and dig that damn hole out and dig the gold out, it has no value. So whoever controls the labor, that's the basis of capitalism, controlling the labor. So when white people in this country, Europeans came here doing slavery and doing Jim Crow segregation, and they stole black folks' labor. Black folk got nothing for their labor. When they stole their labor, they stole black folks' wealth. That's why right now, by having stolen black folks' wealth, that's why right now blacks only own 1/2 of 1%. Exactly what they were doing when they came out of slavery. Because the people that came here that supported and benefited from slavery, they got the wealth that should have gone to black folk. And that's what Conley should have been told. Say, Mr. Conley, you came here two or three generations ago. Nobody cares about whether or not you own slave. You're now a senator. You enjoyed the fruits of that. You enjoyed the fruits of slavery. You enjoyed the fruits of Jim Crow segregation in Kentucky where you grew up. You enjoyed the fruits of having the best home, the best schools, the best neighborhood, having business opportunities. You enjoyed the fruits of having access to resources and privileges and rights that black folk never had. Don't come and tell me because you didn't own slaves. That's not the question, the issue. I saw some silly blacks talking, well, you're right. You didn't own any slaves, so we forgive you. No, you're not. You got to benefit. And even Cornel West made that statement with Dr. Anderson. I disagree, we got all whites didn't own slaves. Who gives a damn? That's not the issue. They got the benefits doing Jim Crow segregation. All whites weren't necessarily joining the Ku Klux Klan and the White Citizen Council and the Black Horse Brigade. But guess what? They got the benefits from it. Whites doing segregation in America, they got the best homes, best community, best businesses, best education, the best, had the rights, the privileges to go in the front door, you had to go through the back, everything they got. But the benefits, tell black folk, quit worrying about who owned the slaves and focus on who got the benefits. I mean, that's lies. And in America, that's why I tell black people, don't mess around calling yourself an African American. It's the native black Americans in this country. They are owed reparations. And without reparations, they haven't got a snowball's chance. And if they don't go out and buy those books you just got through mentioning, there's no way on earth that all these blacks will understand these issues without reading those 5 books called it Black Labor, White Wealth, Powernomics, 2 Dirty Little Secrets books that says you're exceptional people, and the Black History Reader says you're locked into a social construct. Understand what that construct is, so people don't put a camera in your face and a mic in front and let you give up with stupid answers, or say, and when white folk raise stupid questions, you can't answer them.
Everybody, I'd like to get you guys' take. First of all, let me give me a yes or no on this question. I'd like to ask you all, yes or no. Give me a yes or no. Do you think that black people will get reparations at any point? Do you think that we're ever going to get reparations for slavery? Any sort of compensation for what we bumped, what was taken from us? Yes or no? Okay, so I see a no. Come up. Let's see here. I see yes from Dark Knight. Duel says no. Sly Boogie says yes. Okay, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Okay. So I see a lot of yeses and nos. It looks like it's mostly no's, but a few yeses, Dr. Anderson. Okay, so thank you all for answering that question. Now I want to ask you another question with a yes or no answer. When reparations are paid, do you think that the amount that will be paid in reparations will be even remotely adequate relative to what we lost? Do you feel that it's going to be a fair compensation? Do you think that we're going to get the fair amount that represents the trillions that were lost, by our people, that were given up or that were taken from us, through slavery and oppression and things like that? Okay, I'm seeing a lot more no's now. And the reason I throw this in there, Dr. Anderson, and I ask that question in that particular way, is because there's when I used to have debates, I still do. I debate people all the time about college athletes. Should college athletes be paid? And, the NCAA gets about $1 billion a year from the black community by not paying these athletes. And what would happen is, I remember debating a professor once, and the professor said, "You're wrong. College athletes are being paid." And I said, "What do you mean?" And this is when I was a young scholar. And he said, "Well, they are being compensated. They're being paid with a college education. The college degree is worth, it costs $150,000, so they're being compensated." And that's when I said, "Wow, he's actually right. He's right. A college degree, that is payment. They are being paid." So what I then realized is I said, actually, we need to understand there's a difference between being paid and being paid fairly, being compensated versus getting adequate compensation. And so, one of my concerns, Dr. Anderson, had always been that I don't really know which bothers me the most, the idea of them not paying reparations or the idea of them paying reparations. Because I don't know of any time in the history of my life or in the history of any of the books I read. I read all your books. I don't recall at any point in any of this history any situation where white folks did right by black folks. I just don't. I can't think of a time where we were fairly and adequately compensated for anything. So I'm almost wondering if this reparations conversation is a little bit premature. If having the discussion is not just a waste of time because the wrong people are having it, it's done in the wrong way. But when you start things off the wrong way, you're gonna get the wrong result. It's like, I'm a mathematician, and I know that you got the left side of the equation, and you put all the variables in and all the numbers in, and you do all your calculations, and then you get the right side where you get your solution. Well, one thing we know for sure mathematically is that if you put garbage in, you're gonna get garbage out. If you start wrong on the left side, you're gonna get the wrong result on the right side. So, do you think that they are that there's even any chance that the result, if they do decide to pay reparations, there's going to be anything? Because I told black folks yesterday, I said they're going to give you your reparations in Wendy's coupons. That's what they're going to. If they come back and say we got reparations for black folks, I don't believe it's going to be anything that even touches what was taken from us, which I that 12 to 15 trillion dollar range, and that's at a bare minimum. What do you think about that?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And the little responses, explanation you gave about starting off wrong and ending up wrong. You see, black folk have had two major opportunities to focus on what I told you a few minutes ago, to focus on the essence, the true essence and purpose of slavery. It's never been addressed. How in the world can you even talk about reparations if you don't even know what the issues are? And if the purpose of slavery was to maldistribute all the resources and give everything to whites, and for the land, the resources, the privileges, the businesses, the opportunity, the income, everything, and you don't even address that, what are you talking about? Well, I like them, they don't treat me right. That's not the issue. See, when you came out of slavery, you had a few liberal Republicans, white Republicans that were liberal because they had black mistresses and black children. They tried to raise that issue back in 1864. Charles Sumner, Thaddeus Stephenson, Congressman Benjamin, they said that the only two things that black folk can be in America, they're going to be slaves to Watkins, or they're going to be free. That's the only two things that black folk can do. And that would be in this country. And that was in 1864 and 1865. They said the only thing blacks will ever do or ever be is to either be slave, continue to be slaves, or be free. Minimally, to break away from being slaves and to get somewhere close to freedom, you must minimally have 40 acres and $100. That's minimally. And that came out was because of Sherman. General Sherman has said, we got all this land down here, extra land now, because we whipped these Southern boys' butts. They lost all the land, all this free land they got during slavery. We took it away from them. All these surplus mules and jackasses around here, and we got a little bit of money. Let's give that to blacks. That's where the 40 acres of mule came from. But when Lincoln died, here comes the that was supposed to construct the Dred Scott decision, which says black folk have no rights in anything. When after Lincoln died, Andrew Johnson came and said, don't give black folk anything. Don't give 40 acres of mule and $100 reparations. Don't give them any reparation. Turn them loose. turn them loose with nothing, zero. Turn them loose with no land, no privileges, no resources, no homes, no mules, no animals, no weapons, no tools, no education. And that was the rule. And he said that, and then on the opposite side, there's these liberal whites had set up what's called the Freedmen Bureau, and put those little resources in there for black folk. But guess what? Johnson says, take that out and give it to whites. All the resources put into the Freedmen Bureau were stripped out, and they gave give reparations to the Confederate South, plantation owners, and all the whites who fought with the South. They got reparations. That's where the first reparations went to. They got back all the land, even the few sea islands that black folk had gotten under Sherman's march through the South. He gave black folks, so you can have a few of these little islands out here off the coast. Y'all take those islands off the coast of Virginia. You take those islands off, because that's not American land. Right? You got to take that. You go down to North Carolina, take those islands. Go down to South Carolina, take those islands. Take Simon Island, take Johns Island, take Hilton Head Island. Go all the way down to Florida and take Amelia Island. You blacks that have that as some kind of quasi reparations. But guess what? They took blacks from that and gave that back to whites. Everybody's gotten reparations in the society except black folk. Now, here comes another stupid response from arrogant whites. And they can't get a decent response out of a black who's probably sitting in all these meetings talking about reparations. They come out and say, well, you know what? Why should I take money out of my pocket and give it to a black person? Why should I take money? Why do I owe black folk anything? Responded to that and say, you already gotten reparations. And they said, well, we still can't give no money to black folk. You ask how much money. We can't give black folk no money. And what black folk should be saying, if they were smart enough and quick enough in these meetings, here's what they should be saying, Dr. Watkins. What do you mean that you got to spending, you got to take any money out of your pocket to give to black folk for reparation? Hell, you didn't raise Cain when they took the money out of black folks' pockets. When after World War II, when you gave billions of dollars to the Japanese, we just got through fighting in the Point 4 program. You gave the Japanese billions of dollars after World War II in the Point 4 program to resuscitate and rebuild Japan. That money came out of black folks' pockets in America. In 1940, you took money out of their damn pockets, you gave it to the Japanese. But then you went to Europe. About $6 to $7 billion to rebuild Europe and Germany under the Marshall Plan. That money came out of black folks' pockets. You didn't raise any hell about that. When you got Indians, you've been giving the Indians reparations now. That's 150 years when the Indians were slaveholders. You've been giving them reparations. That's why I filed these lawsuits on the 1866 Indian Treaty. That money is coming out of black folks' pockets. But Obama gave $24 million to Jews about 7 or 8 years ago, who were the victims of the Holocaust in Germany, but here in the United States. And because they were poor, he gave them $24 million. That $24 million came out of black folks' pockets. Why don't you get some damn black folks, got some sense if you're going to talk about reparation? That's why when they whites asked this thing, well, hey, why are you going to take money out of my pocket to give it to black folks? Because you took all the money out of black folks' damn pocket through segregation and also out of their backs and their backsides and out of their lives during slavery. The black blacks. The black blacks. Why are you going to stick a damn black entertainer up there? Or you going to stick black comedians or black athletes to answer questions they're ill advised and ill equipped to answer, even though they might be good people? Dr. Watkins, I can go on and on. I don't mean to be giving you a long lecture. Do you get my point, though?
No, I like that. I mean, we don't get this. We don't, what's happening in mainstream media is not giving black people what they need to hear in order to understand what's going on. We're being told all the wrong things. We're being led in the wrong direction. So that's why I feel like it was important. I was appreciative that you were gracious enough to come on to the channel today, because there's a lot of people out there that really want the truth, and so in this space, this is what you get. You guys will get the truth, whether whether people like it or not. So Dr. Anderson, first of all, let me remind everybody who I'm talking to. I'm speaking with Dr. Claude Anderson. He's the author of the books Powernomics, Black Labor, White Wealth, The Black History Reader, Dirty Little Secrets 1 and 2. And he's what I consider to be one of, if not the premier expert on reparations in this country. His books, if you read Black Labor, White Wealth, and Powernomics, you will understand this debate at a level that will exceed the general public. So I encourage you to have your children read some of these books, read them as a family, talk about these concepts, not just to understand history, but to also understand the future, the power path for our people. We need a power path. We do not have a power path right now. We have the path that's going to lead us to more of the same stuff that we've had before. Now, do me a favor, everybody. If you're watching this conversation and you're vibing with this, please hit that thumbs up button. Please hit the thumbs up button so that other people will see the conversation. The more thumbs up you give the video, the more people will come in, because that's how the algorithm works. So please hit the thumbs up button. Also, if you believe in this, if this is something that's important to you, I hope you'll take 1 second right now and take that link to the video and share it maybe on your Facebook page. Share it, pass it around, let other people see it, because we were really trying to push Black intelligence and intelligent conversations. Also, if you want to go take a look at Dr. Anderson's books and get a leg up on these discussions and understand these things, I believe Black people have to bring education back into the home, because the public school system doesn't do it. That's how we end up with all these backwards people we see on TV. So bring it back home. You got scholars out here that are working for you. Dr. Anderson and I are both more qualified than any college professor you'll ever meet when it comes to teaching Black people. You have us right here. We're connected to you. This ain't 1975 where you have to go to a university to get access to professors. This is 2019. You can access your professors right here all the time, every day. And we have access to a lot of very brilliant, very intelligent Black people who are ready to build the future. So, Dr. Anderson, let me ask you this question.
Let me answer one of the other questions. You asked me earlier about how much money would be necessary. What should they be getting? And you're talking about coupons from Burger King and McDonald's. But no, see what they owe Black folk in quantifiable terms. I can tell them all that I can quantify all that and tell them how much money they need. I can do it 3 or 4 different ways. I can base it based on the amount of money was invested in Blacks, and how much whites got out of it. I can break all that, how much every slave was bought, what would depend on him to produce every day in terms of being justified, is being bought and working for a white person. Where a typical white person would say, I'm gonna spend $3 on keeping a Black person alive and feeding and clothing him in a whole damn year. But he had to produce something like $57 to $60 per person. Or I want every Black slave right now and hit the field in the cotton fields. I want him to be able to bring home, pick every day. He got to pick at least 150 to 200 pounds of cotton. And that cotton, and the value of that cotton, I can tell you the value of the cotton was break all that down for you. Tell you can go any way you want. Black folks somewhere around $2 trillion. But they're not able to ever get $2 trillion. It's highly unlikely for a lot of different reasons. One reason is because those in power and they got control of the wealth, and they're selfish and greedy. And right now they have no justification, no incentives to ever do anything for Black folk. They don't need Black folk anymore. And they got a new labor class that's getting cheap. There's cheap labor that's coming into the country through immigrants. They don't need Black folk. And so they're going to be adamantly opposed to doing anything for Black folk. Right-hand side of the Black folk. So before I leave that, it's very important to notice something. Not only don't white folk need Black folk anymore, but they also hate Black folk. Hate them. That research shows me that it's on the eve of the slavery, when white folks should have started talking about reparations for Black folk, 98%, Dr. Watkins, of all the whites in the United States were adamantly opposed to even freeing slaves. Did you always hear white folks saying, well, we fought the Civil War to get you all free? No, you didn't. That war had nothing to do with slavery. That was the primary purpose of fighting the Civil War. Civil War was over whites in the South and the whites in the North were fighting who could control the wealth and industrial complex and vehicles and devices in the South. Blacks were the generator of wealth. Problem is they invested over $8 billion into building in that time, to building a slave power wealth building in this country. The North had all these immigrants coming in, but a typical slave owner with 2 slaves had more wealth than a typical white. He kept throwing his house, his business, and all his personal assets. The wealth was in the South, and the whites wanted to break the South. They wanted to break the wealth power the South had over, and they still did. And that's what these She was talking about the red states in the South. Those are the same states. And they were trying to break those that Confederate lock on wealth building. All the major industries, the cotton, rice, indigo, leather, everything was coming out of the South. And that's what the Civil War was about. It wasn't about slavery. Blacks were insignificant. That's why Abraham Lincoln said, I don't really care that much about slavery. Tell my people, please start reading my damn books. He said, I don't give a damn about slavery. He said, what I'm out is to preserve and save the Union. I want to save the Union. He says that, and blacks are secondary. And if blacks wind up being saved as a result of that, I'll be willing to either ship them into Texas and give them a special spot in Texas, or ship them out of the country back to Liberia, or ship them to the Bahamas. That's the President of the United States. You all keep going and sitting on that statue in Washington, D.C. Hearing Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln didn't give a damn about black folk. That's why the Emancipation Proclamation did not free not one slave. That was put out as a ruse in January of that year to create disturbances in the South. And when the war ended in May, ended incidentally because the North had beaten the South, the word spread that the war had ended, but by the time we got the blacks a month or so later, that's what you all call Juneteenth. That was an incidental accident that blacks got free. The North said, now we've beaten the South, we're going to bring in about another 20 or 30 million Europeans. We're going to go across the Mississippi River now and industrialize the West. That's what the whites wanted in the North. That's why they said, and we're going to go industrialize the West, and you Southerners, you can come up with the black codes, whatever you want, and Jim Crow say, well, you can keep those blacks again and use them as this not as free labor, this time as cheap labor. So and if you're going to go before Congress, damn it, know what you're talking about. Resources in your hand. So the whole thing is that what is right now is impossible in theory and practice for black folk to continue to survive in this nation and on earth. Only 1/2 or 1%. Times are getting ready to break loose. All hell's going to break loose between now and the next 18 months in the election this year. But learn what I told them in my books. That's why I talked about the Harvest Festival Day. You better learn how to come together, build a good, strong sense of community, start building your communities, and in preparation, because when hell breaks loose, the rednecks conservatives in this country, they're going to go try to hurt the weakest link. The weakest link in America are black people. You're still totally dependent on the white slave master and immigrants in this country for your daily necessities, your food. You don't produce anything. You're 100% consumers and zero producers. We're in deep trouble. That's what my books are saying. Move down and get those books and start reading and start doing something. And then when you talk about reparations, tell me, you want to hear all this stuff about your mama being whipped when she's a slave and all that. You talking about, I want you to redistribute the wealth, the resources. We want land. Don't be talking about how much money I give a black. I don't give a damn if you don't give a black person a penny. You put all that money into special trust accounts. You put it into special development banks. I got a whole plan of where the money should go, Dr. Washington, but I'm not going to tell you on your show right now because the claim jumpers will hear us and they'll run right out and start telling it as if it's something they learned and thought up and dreamed up and developed. So that's the long story short.
All right, everybody, I'm talking to Dr. Claude Anderson, author of the books Powernomics, Black Labor, White Wealth, and Black History Reader, Dirty Little Secrets 1 and 2. He is, in my opinion, if not one of the leading experts in reparations. He should be included in this conversation. And since Congress, they're not going to invite somebody like this to testify because he's too smart. He's too smart for the system. But he's always welcome into this platform because this is a space for intelligent black people. So that's where you will see the conversations go here. Let me jump into this. And let me ask everybody, by the way, if you're watching, please hit the thumbs up button, please hit the share button and the subscribe button. Also, I want to remind everybody, if you want to come to any of our investment, you guys know we have seminars where we gather together to talk about investing and things like that. We'll be in New Orleans and Chicago. The New Orleans event is going to be more of a business event. It's going to last 2 days. You can learn more by going to drboyceneworleans.com. It's drboyceneworleans.com. It's the weekend of July. We'll be in Chicago the weekend of July 28th. That's drboycechicago.com, drboycechicago.com. And of course, you guys know about the All Black National Convention, which is happening the weekend of September 27th in Houston. And I'm going to, Dr. Anderson don't know yet, but I'm going to invite
All right, guys, I'm about to get out of here. Yo, appreciate y'all chilling in the stream for a little while, checking on this portrait, working on this hand, and we'll be back at it next time. Peace.